Riley Herbst is the lead candidate to drive the third 2011 racing car in 2025, and Corey LaJoie will not receive any penalties for his actions at Pocono. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them straight really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ross Chastain's 2024 designated driver scheme that we'll see this week in Indianapolis Raceway Park. Scheme's okay in my opinion. Really cool that Ross will be back in the Truck Series this week in the IRP. It's solid looking paint scheme. Looking forward to seeing it on the racetrack at IRP. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tanner Gray's 2024 Bucket Boss scheme that we'll see this weekend at Indianapolis Raceway Park. Scheme's okay in my opinion. Like the red, like the white. I think it's got some decent colors. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at IRP. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Ellis's 2024 Renaissance scheme that we'll see this week in Indianapolis. Very similar to other Renaissance schemes. It's decent. It's good to see Renaissance sponsoring Ryan Ellis once again. It looks decent. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Indianapolis. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Daniel Dye's 2024 Black Widow scheme that we'll see this weekend in Indianapolis. I like the black. I like the red. They did a very solid job on the scheme. Calls had some pretty good looking paint schemes. This one's no exception. I think it looks really solid. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Indianapolis. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Berry's 2024 Panini Caitlin Clark scheme that we'll see this week in Indianapolis for the Brickyard 400. I think this is one of the best paint schemes so far of the year. First of all, great to see Panini back in the NASCAR Cup Series, but secondly, it's pretty incredible that Caitlin Clark is going to be sponsoring a NASCAR Cup Series car. I think it's very excellent. The car looks amazing. One of the best paint schemes I've seen so far this year, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend during the Brickyard 400. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Talladega Truck Race as they have a title sponsor for the event. It's going to be called the Love's RV Stop 225. This race has usually been a 250-mile race, but they're reducing it 25 miles because there is a potential of darkness coming in the way. And generally, historically, as super speedways, we tend to see a lot of overtime restarts. So I do think that is one of the reasons why they've reduced the length a little bit. The race is supposed to start, I think, at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. So they're going to be cutting it very close to darkness, which is why they've reduced it quite a bit. I think it's the right decision that they could have done, and I think it's a really good decision, especially with time potentially being a pretty major problem when we go to Talladega. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the NASCAR Cup Series. As it was reported by Trey Ryan that 3 of the last 4 Cup Series races have featured less than 10 lead changes. This is the first time that this happened since October of 1983. Obviously, with there being a lot of very difficult to pass in the NASCAR Cup Series, you don't tend to have a lot of lead changes. I think Nashville only had about 8 or 9, if I remember correctly. New Hampshire had less as well. And this past weekend at Pocono, I think there were only about 5 or 6 lead changes. It's kind of surprising considering at the start of the year, there were a ton of leaders and a ton of lead changes as well. It's kind of crazy to see the change very quickly. It's not a surprise to see it, though, considering that there's been very difficult to pass to some of the tracks. And I do think there's a good chance and possibility that we'll see more lead changes going forward at some of the tracks coming up, including at Indianapolis. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Pocono Raceway. As it was reported by Adam Stern in regards to the traffic issues from Sunday that basically the guy who runs Pocono Raceway said, this is the only time that this has happened. So we will make plans in the future in regards to traffic issues. Remember, there was a lot of photos beginning to surface in regards to major traffic issues. It looked very similar to what happened at Kentucky Speedway back in 2011. And I do truly believe that if they can make, because they did release a statement in regards to the situation, they are planning to basically, I think, send some refunds to people, and they're trying to make it right, which I think is the best thing that Pocono Raceway can do to get back into good graces of a lot of people. I think they're making the right decision here, and I'm glad to see that they're making some big steps going forward, so a mishap like this never ends up happening again. I'm really glad they're trying to rewrite this and get this situation figured out going forward. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kevin Harvick, as it was announced yesterday morning that Kevin Harvick has officially joined the ownership group of the Charlotte Checkers. The Charlotte Checkers, I think, are an affiliate or a minor league affiliate of one of the big hockey teams, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, Kevin Harvick's part of that big ownership group that is taken over. I think KHI is a part owner of this as well. Obviously, Kevin Harvick has multiple management companies. He's part of the management company that Kevin Harvick is bought up. Is also, of course, with Regan Smith, is part of that management company as well. So I think it's a really good move for Kevin Harvick to buy up a hockey affiliated team. I think it's really solid. I think it's pretty cool. And I'm definitely glad to see that Kevin Harvick has bought up part of the ownership stake of the Charlotte Checkers. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Haas F1 team. As it was announced early this morning that the Haas F1 team will continue their partnership with Ferrari through 2028. I believe Haas has been working with Ferrari pretty much since about the time they got into the world of F1, which I think is back in 2016 and 2017. And they've had a really big technical alliance over the course of the last 10 years. Haas has struggled, definitely, but obviously we know that Gene Haas is going to be still in the Cup Series. But we do know that he's still going to have a big partnership and will probably focus a lot more on his F1 program going forward, as Joe Custer is going to run the management firm for that organization in the NASCAR Xfinity Series and Cup Series going forward. This is a really big pickup, though, for Haas to continue their partnership with Ferrari, as Ferrari is going to grow with Lewis Hamilton joining next year. You've also got, I believe, Nico Hulkenberg and Ollie Behrman joining Haas in 2025. This is a really good to see for sure nonetheless, and very glad to see that Haas F1 will continue working with Ferrari going forward as they continue to try to build up their program going into the future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about BJ McLeod. As it was announced yesterday that BJ McLeod will drive the 66 for MBM Motorsports this weekend in this year's Brickyard 400. He also, remember, will drive the 13 car for MBM in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, so he will be doing double duty this weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Obviously, no drivers are going home, not just in the Xfinity Series, but the Cup Series race as well, so he just needs to do his best to make sure to qualify as best as possible. BJ, of course, no longer focused on being a full-time owner of Live Fast Motorsports. I do think that he is going to do a very decent job. He's been solid. We've seen MBM get a top 15 finish, of course, in that Wreckfest in 2017. He'll be looking for a very strong and great performance this weekend at Indianapolis Motor Speedway in this year's Brickyard 400. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Disney Pixar. As it was reported by Adam Stern from the Sports Business Journal that Disney and NASCAR are doing another Cars-related merchandise line. Multiple drivers have merchandise including Ryan Blaney, Bubba Wallace, and I believe Austin Dillon, maybe even Kyle Busch as well, if I remember the merchandise line correctly. Obviously, NASCAR has done merchandise lines in the past for Pixar and Cars, as NASCAR's had a pretty big association with the Cars brandage over the last couple of years. I'm really glad to see that they're doing this. This stuff looks really great. In my opinion, Mattel is playing a huge part and a huge role in this as well. I think this is excellent. I think this is amazing, and very happy and glad to see that Disney and Pixar are going to be working with NASCAR going forward and doing some really cool stuff going into the future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daniel Suarez. As it was announced earlier today that Daniel Suarez will be driving in the NASCAR Brazil Series race on August 4th at Interlagos. Daniel Suarez also revealed that he'll be getting married to his longtime girlfriend, Julia Piquet, during that time as well. He'll be very busy, of course, during that time. The NASCAR Cup Series will be off for the Olympic break in the next couple of weeks. I think he's going to be running a few races down there in the NASCAR Brazil Series. I do think that Daniel Suarez will do decent for sure. Obviously, it's going to be the stock car series they have in Brazil, and he'll be racing at the Interlagos track where Max Verstappen is going on to win, and we know Max sometimes has been at least somewhat interested in coming in NASCAR points as well. So I think this is really exciting to see for sure. Pretty amazing and really cool that Daniel Suarez will officially race in the NASCAR Brazil Series on August 4th at the Interlagos Speedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Garrett Smithley. As it was announced yesterday that Garrett Smithley will be driving the 45 for Alpha Prime Racing this weekend at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. If I recall correctly, this is going to be the first time that Garrett Smithley has competed with Alpha Prime Racing, and there's a big reason for that, which is we're going to discuss a little bit in regards to JD Motorsports. Garrett, and we also know the 4 points from JD Motorsports also been transferred over to the 45 team, which means means that Garrett Smithley should easily be able to make the field. Trophy Tractor will sponsor him this weekend. He's looking for a solid performance. It's a very stacked NASCAR Xfinity Series field, but we've seen Alpha Prime Racing have some pretty good runs. I do think that Garrett Smithley could be an underdog to watch this weekend, and I do think he'll have a good chance to not to be up front and at least have a solid and good performance this weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stingray Robb. As it was officially confirmed earlier this afternoon that Stingray Robb is officially cleared to race at Toronto at the streets of Toronto this weekend for IndyCar. For those who did not watch IndyCar race, after the checker flag had flown, after the IndyCar race had concluded, Will Power going to victory lane, there was a very scary accident. Alexander Rossi unfortunately ran out of gas coming to the end of the event, and Stingray Robb just had nowhere to go and went up flying. He revealed earlier today that he had hit 109 Gs and basically had lost consciousness for a little bit. The fact that Stingray Robb is getting back behind the wheel of IndyCar after what happened there, I think is absolutely amazing and incredible. I'm glad to see that Stingray Robb's okay, and it's kind of miraculous to see that Stingray Robb is going to be racing this week, and I really hope he can do a good job. He's been very solid in ovals at times. I hope he can do a good job. It'd be really fun. I think it'd be a really cool underdog story if he'd have a very solid run. I really hope we can see Stingray Robb do a good job, and I'm just really fortunate to see that Stingray Robb's okay, especially after a very scary and a big wreck in the IndyCar race this past weekend at Iowa. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hunter Milk-Elray. As it was officially announced earlier today, the Hunter Milk-Elray will make his IndyCar debut this weekend at the streets of Toronto, driving a number 18 for Dale Coyne Racing. Hunter Milk-Elray, I believe, has been competing in IMSA over the course of the last couple years, and I believe also has been competing in the ladder moving up to IndyCar. Hunter is a very talented race car driver. He's been very solid in the lower series coming up, and he does bring some sponsorship and funding to the table as well. Dale Coyne Racing's had a lot of big-name drivers get the chance and opportunity to drive for them over the last few years. That's one thing about Dale Coyne Racing historically. They don't tend to just have one driver run the whole entire season unless you're Sebastian Bourdais or Santino Ferrucci. You generally have a lot of drivers get behind the wheel as they're trying to find the best fit for their organization going into 2025. They've had a lot of big-name drivers. Catherine Lega just drove for them recently. So we'll see how Hunter can do. I think Hunter's a very talented driver. Rumors are that Toby Saria also could be driving for this organization this weekend or maybe to the rest of the year, which I really hope he does because he did a really good job at Mid-Ohio. I'm glad to see that the Hunter Milk-Elray will be able to make his IndyCar debut this weekend. I think he's going to do a very excellent and great job this weekend at the streets of Toronto. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Johnny Sauter. As it was announced yesterday that Johnny Sauter will officially drive the 16th for Hattori Racing this weekend at Indianapolis Raceway Park. This is the first and only scheduled race to my understanding that Johnny Sauter is going to be driving for Hattori Racing. This also is going to be the second attempt for Hattori Racing, as remember, they actually tried to make the NASCAR Truck Series race at North Wilkesboro earlier in the year, but unfortunately because of rain and qualifying not being there, not being amazing in practice, they unfortunately failed to qualify with Eric Almirola. I think Johnny Sauter, with his experience, I think he will have a good chance and opportunity. Actually, no one's going home because there are only 35 trucks entered for the weekend. I do think that Johnny Sauter will do a very solid and great job. My prediction is that Johnny Sauter at least gets a top 15 and maybe a top 10 as well. Johnny, of course, a former champion of the sport back in 2016 in the Truck Series. I think Johnny will have a very solid and great performance, and I think will have a fantastic chance and opportunity to go out there and maybe be an underdog to win. I don't think that's really going to happen, but you never know. But I do think he'll do a very solid job, and nonetheless, really happy and glad to see that he'll be driving for Hattori Racing this weekend. I think he's going to be a major contender and threat for a fantastic run this weekend at the Indianapolis Raceway Park. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Iowa Speedway. As it was reported by Adam Stern, and this comes from an NBC Sports article from some of the people at NBC Sports, that according to many IndyCar drivers, NASCAR ruined Iowa Speedway. Will Power believes the hybrid also played a major role in that. If you watch the IndyCar race, this past weekend, both of them at Iowa Speedway, you saw a very lackluster product. There were very few passes up front for the race lead, and generally the only passes that happened up front for the lead were during pit stops, whether it was caution pit stops or basically untimely cautions. Scott McLaughlin dominated the first race, and we saw basically only 3 leaders on the race at Iowa. I think the hybrid system, also with how much weight it has on the back as they continue to add weight on these Indy cars, it's creating a lot more of these dirty air issues and problems, and it's a big thing that does affect the NASCAR Cup cars, especially the next-gen cars as well. If you continue to add more weight on them, it does become a more major problem, and I really hope that maybe in the future, when they do have new regulations, which we're not expecting new regulations, by the way, for a very, very long time. I think the most easiest thing that they could do is try to find a way to get some of the weight out of the car, maybe getting rid of the hybrid system for the rest of the year and then putting it in 2025. As I do think the hybrid system is hurting the racing just a little bit. So I think the smartest thing that they could do is maybe find a way to get a lot of that hybrid system out. I know they invested a lot of money, or maybe just let the teams decide what they want to do. But I do think getting rid of the hybrid system will fix some of the major problems and issues that we saw on the ovals, because it's an oval heavy rest of the year. They need to find a way to be able to have better racing at some of these ovals for the remainder of the season. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Joe Graf Jr., as it was officially confirmed yesterday that Joe Graf Jr. will drive the 19 for Joe Gibbs Racing this weekend in the NASCAR Xfinity Series at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. This will be Joe Graf Jr.'s first scheduled start of 2024. We know that Joe was supposed to drive for Joe Gibbs Racing, but rumors, speculation began to circulate that Joe might not be part of this team, because they've had drivers like Justin Bonzoon or drive this 19 car. You've had, I think, Ryan Truex make a one-off start in his car or two. You've had Brett Moffitt make starts, and you've also had other drivers get in behind the wheel of this car. So we were wondering if Joe Graf Jr. was going to be racing in this car. But I'm glad to see that he will be racing. But I'm going to be real honest and frank, I don't expect Joe Graf Jr. to be a major threat and contender. I think he will sadly struggle. I don't think the pace and speed is going to be there for him. I don't think he does well. I think he will probably finish outside the top 10 or top 15, because the 19 car doesn't have the same speed as the 20 car or the 81 car on most weeks, unless Ty Gibbs is behind the wheel or Justin Bonzoon is behind the wheel. I think that Joe will finish outside the top 10 or 15 most likely, but it's good to see at least he is with JGR. We're kind of wondering if he was going to be with them or not, but at least we know for sure that Joe Graf Jr. will be racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race this week in Indianapolis. My guess is he's going to run a majority of the rest of the races in 2024, especially once the playoffs do come around. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Lee Diffie. There was a report that came out from Adam Stern yesterday that kind of quotes from Auto Auction that Lee Diffie is really excited for the future in regards to NBC. There is expected that he will no longer be calling IndyCar races. Remember, IndyCar will be moving to Fox starting in 2025, and we are expecting that Lee Diffie is going to stay around on the NBC family going forward. Lee Diffie is one of the best commentators, and it's sad to see that he will no longer be calling IndyCar races, especially for the remainder of this season. But why is he going to be not doing IndyCar races? Well, of course, he will be going over to the Olympics and focusing on that. But also another big reason is because he also will be starting to cover NASCAR races after the Olympic break. Remember, this week's Brickyard 400 is going to be the final potential Cup race that Rick Allen is going to call, since Rick Allen's been generally calling him over the last 10 years, though there's been some one-offs where we've seen Dale Jr. and also Lee Diffie, of course, be able to call those races as well. I think Lee Diffie being able to cover NASCAR Cup races, I think is going to be an amazing and really fun thing to watch. Lee Diffie's an amazing commentator. I would love to see him be part of upcoming TV deals, but it sounds like he will be staying with NBC for the long-term future. I'm very excited about this for sure for him. I think he's going to do an excellent and fantastic and great job, and I do truly believe that we will see Lee Diffie put on a really strong clinic as a lead commentator for NASCAR. That's what he's going to be doing, and trust me, I'm very happy about this and glad to see that Lee Diffie will be calling some NASCAR Cup Series races in 2024, but Rick Allen will still be doing the Xfinity Series coverage, and then we'll go to the CW for the remainder of the season. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about JD Motorsports. As it was reported by TobyChristie.com and Toby Christie himself that JD Motorsports has officially laid off a ton of employees. And it was reported also by Toby Christie that they filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy all the way back in April. Obviously, there's been a lot of bad things going on with JD Motorsports. They were supposed to have 2 cars for this weekend in Indianapolis, and they actually were supposed to have 2 cars last week at Pocono, but unfortunately they withdrew the 6th car, and we've been hearing a lot of rumors about the future of this team and organization. Obviously, JD Motorsports has been way behind on their bills. They filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and according to what people have said, they were $400,000 in debt. And if you have a lot of money that you're in debt, you've got to pay that back, and filing bankruptcy will at least help you a little bit, though it's not a really great thing to file it. Look, JD Motorsports, they've been doing things their own way for a very, very long time. I remember back in 2019 and 2017 and 18 when they were somewhat competitive. They were doing a really good job with Ross Chastain. But then you started having more competitive teams. You had teams like Alpha Prime that got up there. You, of course, had teams like Call Racing became good. You've got other organizations that are making movement. You've got AIM Racing in there currently at the moment. SS Greenlight's shown more speed. And I think JD Motorsports has just been behind the 8 ball and behind the times, unfortunately. That's why, unfortunately, a lot of their employees have sadly been laid off. It's a really unfortunate story. There's no denying that, but am I really shocked and surprised about this? I'm not really surprised, to be honest. It's a really sad story overall of a team that was around for many years, but they really, unfortunately, could not keep up with the times. Again, I really hope JD Motorsports can be around. They could be a late entry this weekend, which means they might not be gone altogether, but there sadly is a really great chance and a strong possibility that JD Motorsports will no longer be in NASCAR. It's a really sad story, but like I said, I'm not really shocked or surprised to see that this might be the end of JD Motorsports in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. It's a shame, but I'm not really shocked or surprised by this overall. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not really shocked or surprised by it. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ty Dillon. As it was officially confirmed earlier this afternoon that Ty Dillon will be driving a 33 for Richard Childress Racing in the NASCAR Cup Series this weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Brickyard 400. This will be the first time that Ty Dillon has raced for RCR in some sort of capacity since he raced for them in the NASCAR Xfinity Series back in 2016. And this will be the first start that Ty Dillon has had in the Cup Series with them since all the way back in 2015. Now, generally, I'd be a little bit confused about putting Ty Dillon behind the wheel, but Ty Dillon, to be fair, did win at this track in the NASCAR Xfinity Series straight up back in 2014. Granted, it was because of fuel mileage, but he still was able to go on to win, which I find to be extremely impressive. I think Ty Dillon is an okay driver, but he's been struggling so far in the Truck Series this year, and we're not even sure if he's going to be back with Racklable Racing in 2025 at this moment. This could be an audition. RCR is not expected to have a third car. They were really pushing to get Noah Gragson to drive his third seat. They also, of course, do have Austin Hill and Jesse Love, who I think are doing a very solid job in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year, but I don't think they're going to be moving up in 2025. I am happy to see that Ty Dillon is back, though. I think he'll do a decent job for sure. I don't think he's going to be a major threat and contender for the win. I don't think he's going to finish inside the top 30 most likely. I think he will struggle a little bit. But again, I'm really happy nonetheless and glad to see that we'll see Ty Dillon racing in the NASCAR Cup Series this weekend at this year's Brickyard 400. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Xfinity. As it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that Xfinity may do a short-term renewal as title sponsor of the Xfinity Series for 2025 before shifting its relationship with NASCAR. According to reports, also Geico, it is unclear if they're going to be sticking around past 2025, and they're actually looking for a 5th premier sponsor as well. Xfinity is one of the 4 big premier sponsors. I think it's Xfinity, Busch Beer, Geico, and I think Coca-Cola are the 4 major entitlement sponsors that are part of NASCAR. But they're looking for a 5th major entitlement partner to come in and work with NASCAR going forward. Xfinity has been sponsoring the secondary series since 2015. Before that, of course, was the NASCAR Nationwide Series, and Nationwide pretty much just left at the end of 2017, and they never came back. Geico, of course, has not been around in recent years, unfortunately, as much. They do have some stuff they're kind of associated with, but it seems like compared to all the other major brands, you don't see Geico as much. And that's why I think Xfinity's looking to have more of an entitlement sponsor going into the future. My big question is that once Xfinity does leave, what takes over as the brand? Do they just call it the secondary series, or do they bring Busch back? Busch was a sponsor of the secondary series pretty much from the beginning of 1982 up until the 2006 season, or 2007 season, I should say, and then Nationwide came in and took over in 2008. And they did that from 2008 up until 2014. I think that's something that we're going to have to pay attention and focus on. Obviously, a big reason why many people believe they're leaving as well is because they're basically leaving, of course, NBC and Comcast, because Xfinity is owned by Comcast, which is why I think you're likely going to see this move in the future. Again, I think it does make a lot of sense for them to stick around for one more year and then maybe in the future go ahead and focus on some other aspects going forward. It's going to be very interesting to see how things play out going into the future, but there will be some big movement coming in regards to that in the not so distant future. In regards to Xfinity, I think they are going to be making some pretty big movement as we get closer to the rest of the season, and we'll see how the rest of it plays out. But I do think Xfinity sticks around for one more year, and then in 2026, I think they will make another big move going into the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Iowa Speedway once again. As it was reported by Adam Stern earlier this afternoon that the NASCAR Cup Series will likely return to Iowa Speedway next year. Both IndyCar and NASCAR can coexist according to Bob Danker, who is an executive at the Penske Entertainment Group. NASCAR had a very solid event earlier this year at Iowa Speedway, and a lot of people, including myself, were wondering if Iowa Speedway would make a return after making its return to the NASCAR schedule for the first time since 2019, and of course they hosted their first ever Cup event. And a big reason why they likely got the date is because they were trying to get up to Canada for 2024, but obviously that did not end up happening, and Iowa was a consolation prize. Iowa is owned, I believe, by ISC, if I'm not mistaken, so it's very likely they're going to be back on the schedule, which I think is super exciting. I think Iowa Speedway is a very solid racetrack that does put on good racing. Again, I know the IndyCar race this past weekend wasn't that great, but I do think the NASCAR events, especially the Xfinity Series race, were really good. And the ARCA race was one of the better ARCA races I've seen in a long time as well, seeing Connor Zilic go on and win and seeing some tempers between him and William Sawalich. I think Iowa Speedway is a very solid facility. I really wish that NASCAR could kind of find a way to get Hy-Vee to work with them going forward, which I think they're going to have more association with NASCAR, that being Hy-Vee going into the future, even though Hy-Vee is going to be sticking with McLaren and IndyCar going forward. I think it's really cool to see this, though, that Iowa Speedway is wanting to find a way to stick around and basically trying to stay on the Cup Series schedule, gangs. I think it was a very solid debut race for the track. I think it was very fun. It had some pretty good racing, especially. I absolutely enjoyed it, and I do really hope that it can stay on the schedule going forward. It sounds like there's a really good chance that it will end up happening. It's been rumored to be on the schedule. We're still kind of waiting on what that 2025 Cup schedule is going to look like. The schedule, by the way, was supposed to be released back in late May, but now we're in the middle of July, and we might be waiting until we get to the break, which is not that far away. So we'll see what ends up happening going forward in regards to that. I really do hope and pray that we do, in fact, get to see some really good racing going forward, and Iowa Speedway can stay on the NASCAR Cup schedule going into the long-term future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hailie Deegan once again. As it was officially confirmed by Joseph Strigley that Hailie Deegan will team up with Ken Schrader in the Speed Tour All-Star race at Lime Rock Park. This is the big IROC event that is going to be going on. Ken Schrader, Greg Biffle, I think Bobby Labonte, a couple other big names, or Mark Martin, and a few other big champions are going to be racing in this event as well. It was also confirmed earlier this evening that Hailie Deegan will also be competing in a Trans Am race with Nitro Motorsports at Lime Rock Park over the weekend as well. This confirms that Hailie Deegan most likely will not be at Indianapolis Motor Speedway in any sort of capacity. Hailie Hailie Deegan is still looking for a ride going into 2025, and she is trying to find a way to keep herself focused through the rest of the year. She obviously did, of course, and has been heavily rumored to be potentially driving in the NXT with the Andretti Global organization. She could make a few select starts at the end of the year on the ovals, but I do think that Hailie Deegan is going to come back to NASCAR in some sort of capacity in 2025. I saw maybe a little bit of false report out there that she could be joining the Haas factory team. I'm kind of taking that with a grain of salt at the moment, considering the fact there's been no credible information on that at this particular point. As for Hailie Deegan staying focused and racing on IROC and, of course, other racing series to keep her mind focused, that's the most important thing. I really do hope and pray, though, that she can come back and race in NASCAR in the future. As much as I think some would disagree, that's fine and understandable. Her racing in NASCAR is going to bring a lot of eyes on it. And I really hope, like I said, we do get to see Hailie Deegan be back in the NASCAR series in the future. I don't think she needs to be in Cup by any stretch of imagination, but I do think Hailie Deegan racing in at least Xfinity or trucks in the future would not be a bad move. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to Hailie Deegan and whether or not she will come back and race in NASCAR in the future. But it sounds like there's been talk about it, and there's a good chance and possibility that maybe sooner rather than later we'll see her come back to NASCAR. But as of right now, she's focused on other forms of racing, trying to build up her resume a little bit more and hoping that she could be a little bit more successful going into the long-term and foreseeable future for 2025. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the charter negotiations once again. We've been talking about charter negotiations on this channel over the course of the last few months. And really for the last year or two, I should say. These charter negotiations between the teams, the tracks, and NASCAR themselves have been going on since all the way back in late 2021 going into 2022. We are supposed to have a charter agreement that was supposed to be done actually last year, but hasn't been completed at this time. And Denny Hamlin was on the Kenny Wallace show this past week, and I caught this, but I didn't talk about it until it was reported by Adam Stern. According to what Adam Stern reported, Denny Hamlin says it costs us $18 million a year to put a car on the racetrack. We've asked NASCAR to cover the cost, nothing more. And the answer has been no, you're basically out of luck. First of all, obviously, you have the teams versus NASCAR. There are four big pillars that have basically come up. Number one, they want more money. They're wanting, I think, up to about 40% of the prize pool. Number two, they're wanting new revenue share. They're wanting more money coming in from the gambling side of things, and they're wanting a portion of that gambling side of things. Number three, they're wanting more control of basically NASCAR in a sense, where they could be able to find a way who make the decisions, which I think the teams being allowed to make some decisions for the sport, I don't really think is a bad thing in my opinion. I think letting the teams have the option to kind of find a way to continue helping the sport grow, I don't think is a really bad thing. I know some would disagree, but NASCAR has been running everything basically the same for a very, very long time, and I think you need to find a way to get everyone together. We are in the middle of July. We are getting into the red zone right now where we need to start getting these negotiations done. The last big thing is permanent charters. This has been a major, major sticking point, especially with charter prices going up, which they've gone down quite a bit. Most teams in the charter agreement are absolutely for getting it done. The biggest one we know that's been kind of out there talking about a lot of this stuff going on is, of course, 23 Line Racing and Denny Hamlin. Michael Jordan's been outspoken about it, and we know Denny Hamlin's been very outspoken about it, not just on his podcast, but speaking to the media as well. And I think he played a big part in getting that one big video out, which a lot of people have been talking about as well. The charter negotiations are going to be an ongoing thing, and I really hope we get it done. We should have already had the charter negotiations done already at this point, but the fact that we're getting as late as we are in the year and we still don't have them done is really, really frustrating. I think at some point there is going to have to be a compromise that has to come to the table in order for things to get done so we can move on and focus on the next big thing. We still need to get the schedule out at this point, and there's some big driver signings that still need to happen. And obviously 23 Line Racing, they spent a ton of money on an airspace shop that they ended up building. So I think it's going to continue to be a big thing to watch. We've been talking about it quite a bit. It's one of the big storylines going through the rest of the year, and it's going to be a big story to continue to fall as time progresses and goes on. But trust me, I think there's a lot more to come out. I think there's going to be a lot more negative coming out, and probably not a lot of positive in regards to this. You've got one side that wants to get this done, and you've got the other side that's kind of saying, no, we're not even close to getting it done. So it's very frustrating for sure, but honestly, it is what it is, and I'm not really shocked or surprised to see some of the reactions, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about an option tire. As it was officially confirmed earlier this morning that NASCAR will have 2 tire choices available at the next NASCAR Cup Series race at Richmond Raceway when we do come back for the break. They're basically going to be using the same tires they used at North Wilkesboro during the All-Star race. What were those tires? Well, there's going to be a prime option and there's going to be an option tire. The option tire is going to give you a lot more grip, but it's going to have a lot more fall off. The prime tire may not have as much grip and much speed from the beginning, but it's going to be able to stay very consistent for a long time, and it'll be able to eventually overtake, or that's the ultimate goal. Now, according to what NASCAR announced earlier today, there will be 2 sets of the option tires throughout the race that you're going to be allowed to use, and there's going to be 6 prime sets. The regular prime tire has to be used during qualifying. So you can't use the option tire to get a lot more speed. They want everyone basically on the same even advantage. They don't want anyone getting a competitive advantage by using the option tire. You also cannot mismatch tires. So for instance, you can't just use 2 of the prime tires and 2 of the option tires. You're required to have that. There's also going to be a 45-minute session as well with the same tires to figure out what to do. And basically, we'll have 2 sets of primes, I believe, and a couple sets or 1 set of options that you can use throughout the practice session. They're asking Goodyear a lot, that being NASCAR, to try to put on the best product possible because the racing product on short tracks, let's be real and frank and honest, it has been very disappointing. And they're putting a lot of pressure on Goodyear to try to fix some of the major issues and major problems with this next-gen car. I think there are a lot of underwhelming flaws that this car really needs to be worked on, but I do think the NASCAR at least is starting somewhere with Goodyear. They said a lot of things are on the table, but I think the easiest thing that NASCAR can do is find a way to add more horsepower to the next-gen car. I think that's another big thing. If they ended up doing that, I think that'd be one other major way to kind of fix a lot of the issues with the racing product that have been going on. But I think there's at least a step in the right direction. Now, obviously, the other thing to kind of think about is, did this not work in North Wilkesboro? You're right, it really didn't work in North Wilkesboro. However, you have to remember that it was at a new repave. Richmond hasn't been repaved in God knows how long, since like 2001 or 2002 or something like that. So the surface is a lot older and a lot more abrasive. Yes, it's going to be at night, but I do think the racing product at least will be a little bit better with this. So I think we should hopefully see at least a little bit of a better racing product, because trust me, I think the racing product that we've seen with the short track racing has just been unacceptable and uncalled for, really. So I really hope this at least is a step in the right direction. Do I think it's going to fix everything? No, absolutely not. But I hope that we do get to see at least a very solid and good race going forward, and we can see some really good short track racing. Do I think it's going to be amazing? No, I don't expect it to be absolutely amazing, but I'm hoping the racing at least can be a little better with the option tire, and there hopefully could be a lot of fall off on this car for the tires. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Aric Almirola. As it was officially confirmed over the last couple of days that Aric Almirola will in fact make his official return to the NASCAR Xfinity Series this weekend at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, driving the number 20 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. Aric Almirola has not raced in the NASCAR Xfinity Series since all the way back at Darlington when he drove the 20 car to a top 5 finish. He was scheduled to run at Charlotte and at New Hampshire and a couple other races on the NASCAR Xfinity Series schedule. But if you remember correctly, they basically kind of got officially confirmed that Aric Almirola got suspended indefinitely by Joe Gibbs Racing for an altercation that he had with Bubba Wallace in a competition meeting. According to what Joe Gibbs had stated and what the team has stated to Jordan Bianchi and Jeff Gluck, they felt like the Aric Almirola was the instigator, and Bubba Wallace was also asked about this over that weekend at Nashville when this kind of came out, and Bubba pretty much kind of said that I'm not really going to say much about it, and he said the only time that he is going to answer. Eric Almirola is probably going to be asked quite a bit about what ended up happening. We know that Eric Almirola and Bubba Wallace have had a pretty big history over the many years they've been racing against each other. They had issues all the way back in 2017 when Bubba Wallace was substituting for Eric Almirola when he was out at the time for his injury suffered at Kansas Speedway. Bubba got sent a text by Eric Almirola all the way back in 2018, and it wasn't the nicest text. Basically tell him good luck, you are going to need it. Then you go back to 2023 at what happened at the Coke 600. There was some contact. Apparently, Bubba might have been flipping off Eric Almirola on the straightaway, and Eric and Bubba got into an altercation, and there was a little bit of shoving that took place during the Coke 600. So there's been it really isn't a major shock and surprise when you look at the backstory between these two. I do expect that over this weekend, Eric Almirola is going to be asked questions in regards to this. But I'm at least a little happy to say that Eric is back behind the wheel. We don't know the rest of Eric Almirola's schedule for the rest of the year. We do know Watkins Glen is one race he's going to run. And I do imagine many of the final races of the year, that's when he's going to end up running. Because remember, he was supposed to run around 14 to 15 races. And so far, Eric has only made 5 or 6 starts. I do think Eric Almirola is going to have a solid chance and a pretty strong opportunity to go out there and contend for the win. This 20 car has been super quick. Eric, of course, has won in this car already this year at Martinsville. John Hunter scored 2 wins so far this year in Xfinity. And we've all seen Ryan Truex go to victory lane in this car as well. So I do expect that you are going to see Eric Almirola have a great chance and opportunity to pick up the victory. I think the pace is going to be there. I think the speed is really going to end up being there for Eric, and I think he'll be a major threat and contender. It's good to see Eric Almirola back in the Cup Series. We know, like I said, he had an altercation with Bubba in a competition meeting. We're probably going to find out more about what exactly happened in that exact competition meeting between both those drivers, and we should be knowing about that when we do get next week or later this week in Indianapolis. It probably will get asked on Friday. I think it might be on the press pass, if I'm not mistaken, so we'll get to hear what Eric Almirola has to say in regards to that. So we'll have to wait and see what happens when information comes out in regards to that with Eric Almirola. But we do know officially that Eric Almirola will be driving a 20 car once again this weekend at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Corey LaJoie. If you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race this past weekend at Pocono Raceway, you saw the incident between Kyle Busch and Corey LaJoie. On the restart with about 40 laps to go in this race, Kyle Busch did put a block on Corey LaJoie going down the Long Pond straightaway going into the turn. Corey LaJoie makes a major misjudgment and a mistake, and it kind of looks intentional and turns Kyle Busch basically into the grass. Kyle Busch goes up the racetrack and collects 4 or 5 drivers, including Ryan Preece, Harrison Burton, and a couple of drivers that are involved in the incident and the wreck as well. Corey LaJoie's radio communication was not very good. You probably heard it over the weekend where Corey said he basically blocked me twice. And then his pit crew basically was telling him, despite the fact that Kyle Busch was Hellspire Motorsports Truck Series program in the last year or so, they were kind of calling out Kyle Busch quite a bit as well. Corey LaJoie then got out of the car and basically said the same thing he had said and then kind of said he made a major mistake kind of at that time. And then on Monday, before we get to the actual penalty report that kind of didn't come out, but basically Corey kind of said he felt bad for what happened to Kyle a little bit and also felt bad for causing a big wreck in the incident. Now, big question a lot of people have been happening is whether Corey LaJoie was going to receive any sort of actions, fines, or points penalties for what happened on the racetrack. NASCAR confirmed earlier today that they, in fact, will not be penalizing Corey LaJoie at all for what happened at Pocono Raceway this past weekend against Kyle Busch. I do have to question his call a little bit. Now, personally, had Corey LaJoie, normally I would probably say that this is absolutely the right call. And I think normally this would be the right call because it's a racing incident. My big problem is the fact that just this past week or so, Bubba Wallace got a $50,000 fine for contact post-race. He hit Alex Bowman after the checker flag. He paid back and gave him some little bit of retaliation and put him in the wall a little bit. Now, Alex Bowman, I believe, may have had a seatbelt on, which I question why you have your seatbelt off to begin with. You shouldn't have that off when you're driving in a car. Just like if you're driving in a normal car, they tell you, keep your seatbelt on. I get you want to get out of the car quickly, but why in the hell do you have your seatbelt off and do that? Especially since, 2017, Denny Hamlin had his seatbelt off and Chase Elliott ran into him and he got no penalty for it. Meanwhile, Chase Elliott didn't get a penalty for what happened with him and Daniel Suarez. NASCAR has had a major problem with the inconsistent calls. They give a $75,000 fine to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. for a punch against Kyle Busch. They gave Austin Hill a fine for intentionally wrecking him under caution. To me, when I look at the Corey LaJoie incident, it doesn't exactly look completely intentional, but it does a little bit to an extent. And the reaction from some of the pit crew members on that team, I thought were extremely unjustified by the way they reacted. So personally, yeah, I think Corey LaJoie should have gotten some sort of penalty because other drivers have been penalized already this year as well. Again, they basically do this boys have at it thing, but if you're going to do boys have at it, you can't penalize one guy the previous week, that being Bubba Wallace, and then not penalize another guy, especially since we've seen rampages under caution or after the race with Martin Truex Jr., who ran into multiple drivers, heat of the moment stuff, and Martin Truex Jr. ran into Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin at Richmond. I don't like the inconsistency. If they were just consistent, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I would have not had a problem with Corey LaJoie not receiving any sort of penalty if Bubba Wallace had not received a penalty. I don't think what Corey LaJoie did normally should have resulted in a penalty. I agree with that 100%, and I didn't think NASCAR was going to do anything about it. But my big problem is the major inconsistent calls. I also don't like the fact that they use fan reaction to make a decision on with Bubba Wallace last week. I'm a little frustrated about that because personally, I think Bubba Wallace definitely shouldn't have gotten a $50,000 fine, which is why I'm frustrated LaJoie got nothing. Corey LaJoie caused a big wreck that had hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage caused by him, and he basically gets nothing for it. Again, I just hate the inconsistent calls. I know why they didn't give him one because of the inconsistency that they have, and they've got to find a way to start being a little more consistent with the calls they're making. They've had a major problem with this for years. They continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again, and they wonder why fans continue to be frustrated with NASCAR as time goes on. Maybe if you started being a little more consistent with your calls, maybe fans wouldn't be pissed off or frustrated. Again, I get why they didn't give him a penalty because they're inconsistent. Nothing surprises me or shocks me anymore. I just think there should have been at least some sort of action taken for what happened on the racetrack, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Riley Herbst. As it was initially reported by the Door Bumper Clear podcast that Riley Herbst is the top candidate to drive the third 2311 racing car for 2025. And Bob Pockers actually confirmed that when someone asked a question in regards to what happens with Riley Herbst, he is the current favorite to drive the third 2311 racing car. According to other reports as well, Corey Heim will likely return to Tricon Garage in the Truck Series full-time in 2025 as well. Now, a lot of people are wondering, why would they choose Riley Herbst over Corey Heim? Well, there's a big reason for that. Number one, it all comes down to one key thing: money. Riley Herbst is made of a lot of money. His family owns that charter. From what I understand and what people are saying, it sounds like that Riley Herbst's father is paying for that charter for Riley Herbst to be in that third 2311 racing car. Now, looking at statistics-wise in regards to Riley Herbst, I personally don't think he's deserved the opportunity over Corey Heim. Corey Heim has won 10 truck races at the age of 22. He's the youngest driver to ever do that, by the way, and has already won 5 Truck Series races in 2024 alone, and likely is going to win the championship this year unless Christian Eckes finds a way to beat him at the end of the year, which Christian Eckes is also in the running to move up the Cup next season. Now, you look at Riley Herbst. He's been in NASCAR now for a very long time at this point, since 2018. He is 25 years old now. He has only won one NASCAR Xfinity Series race in the 4 or 5 years he's been full-time. Now, granted, that one race he ended up winning, he did it in dominating fashion. I will give you that. But the big reason, like I said, he's getting the third 2311 racing car is because of money. He's not going to be replacing Tyler Reddick or Bubba Wallace. Tyler Reddick is under a long-term contract with his team, and Bubba Wallace is also under contract at least through this year, but he will get a contract extension in the not-so-distant future. If Riley Herbst does go to 2311 racing, what are my expectations for Riley? Well, I think Riley Herbst is going to do okay. I don't think Riley Herbst is going to be as good as Tyler Reddick, and I don't think he's going to be better than Bubba Wallace. Realistically, I think he'll be the third wheel at the organization. I think he's going to be around 20th to 25th in points most of the year, and I do think he'll struggle a little bit to be extremely competitive, especially with 23XI Racing likely having 3 full-time entries. It might affect 23XI Racing in a big way as well. What does this mean for Corey Heim? Like I already mentioned and said, Corey Heim more than likely is going to be in a part-time entry with this team next year and will probably drive that 4th 23XI Racing car, the same car that we are going to see Mark Truex Jr. drive, maybe Carlos Kurt Busch as well. We are also expecting to probably drive in that car in select races. I am frustrated that Corey Heim isn't going to get the chance and opportunity to move up to the NASCAR Cup Series full-time next year. I think he's ready. He's more ready than Riley Herbst, in my opinion, to move up. Yes, Riley Herbst has made more Cup starts than Corey Heim, but in the few races I've seen Corey Heim race, he's done a lot better. And I just don't feel like Riley Herbst has earned the right and opportunity to make the jump up full-time to Cup and do a great job. But if Riley Herbst truly does go to 23XI Racing, what does this mean for Haas Factory? Because remember, that 98 car is going to be open up. We already know going into next year that the 00 car is likely going to be open up as well, as more than likely Cole Custer is moving up to the Cup Series and driving the 00 car in their Cup program next year, as of course Joe Custer is going to be the lead person working on that program, as the GM of course will have a lot of focus on the F1 program going forward. Well, there's a lot of drivers that are rumored that could go there. Ryan Preece more than likely, unless he goes to Ricker Racing in the Cup Series next year, he is more than likely going to be driving for the Haas Factory team in Xfinity. He does have a little bit in sponsorship funding that does come with him a bit, so that will definitely help him get the chance and opportunity to drive for the team in Xfinity next year. I think Ryan's a very good driver. I know he hasn't been really that good in the NASCAR Cup Series this year, but I certainly do think that he will do a solid job if he does end up going there in 2025. Another driver that could go there is Harrison Burton. Harrison Burton does bring a little bit of sponsorship funding with him. Dex Imaging, of course, and many are expecting that Harrison Burton will likely not be full-time in the Cup Series next year. He could be part-time with Rick Ware, but many do think he's in the running for one of these seats. Another driver that might surprise some people, will not surprise, is Hailie Deegan. Hailie Deegan, I think, is so far the Ford program, and there's been rumor, speculation that she could be in the running maybe for the seat next year. I don't think she's earned a right opportunity because she struggled with AM Racing, but she does bring sponsorship and funding, and with the Monster connection that she has, it would make a lot of sense as well. And then you got to look at drivers like Matt DiBenedetto maybe and Ty Majeski, who could be candidates as well. But going back to 23XI Racing, like I already mentioned, Tyler Reddick's under contract long-term, and Bubba Wallace will stay at 23XI Racing, and that contract extension will happen very soon. What does this mean for the Ford camp, too? Because you're going to lose Riley Herbst at the end of the year. We know that Chase Briscoe is going to Toyota. They are keeping Noah Gragson in front row. We have been hearing that they're looking at that third front row motorsports seat, which we do know that Christian Eckes, Sam Mayer, and Zane Smith are the lead drivers for the third seat going into next year, which many think that Sam Mayer will most likely end up getting the seat for 2025. Then you got to look at some other teams. Could Corey Heim go to Legacy Motor Club? That could be an option. Eric Jones, from what I understand, he wants a multi-year deal, and they're only willing, from what I understand, to give one-year deals. So that's something that's kind of holding up things going forward. You've also got some other big rumblings and rumors about other teams that are looking to make big moves. We know that another one of the big teams that's going to get a charter is Trackhouse Racing as well. They're expected to have Shane Van Gisbergen in that third seat going into 2025. SVG, in my opinion, is ready to make the move up to the Cup Series next year. He's won 3 NASCAR Xfinity Series races. I do think more than likely he's going to make the move up to the Cup Series and drive in the third Trackhouse seat in 2025. If Sam Mayer does go to front row, you have to think that Connor Zilisch is going to get that seat. Connor Zilisch is in the running to take over one of the junior motorsports cars going into 2025. You've also got Carson Quaffle, who's about to make a big move and potentially can move up to the Xfinity Series as well. There's a lot of big silly season moves that still need to happen going into next year, and I think there's a lot of big movement that's in the works and a lot of big announcements that are coming here in the not-so-distant future. It's going to be very fun to watch this play out and see how things go on, but there's a lot of big silly season movement that is coming very, very soon, and Riley Herbst going to 23XI is the next big move that might end up happening. So that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so that if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support on Patreon as well. And let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. How do you think Riley Herbst is going to do at 20-11 if he goes there? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Corey LaJoie receiving no action for what happened at this past weekend at Pocono? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, you're going to see the NASCAR Xfinity Series race picks for for the Brickyard race. Then, of course, on Thursday, you'll see race picks for the Brickyard 400, and you'll see the paint schemes for the Brickyard 400 as well. And then on Friday morning, you'll see NASCAR news. We discuss the news over the course of the last couple days. There's been more news breaking behind the scenes that Adam Stern's been reporting that we'll discuss on Friday. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.